Hi, everyone. I'm Diana Banks, and I'm a vice president at the American Bankers Association, where I work on a variety of banking issues, including ABA's support of minority depository institutions and community development financial institutions, and diversity, equity, and inclusion banking policy. ABA has been leaning forward in this space, and so it is such an honor for me to be here today to moderate this really important discussion with Nikita Pearson, the new director of the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion at the FDIC, a key regulator of the banking industry. We're going to talk with her today about her office and the strategic plan that they've just released on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Welcome, Nikita.
Thank you, Diane. I'm excited to be here.
Great. It is going to be so great to talk to you. So I want to start by talking about you just a little bit. I think you have an amazing story, an amazing background. Let's start with the fact that we are both small town Georgia girls. You're from Thompson, Georgia. I'm from Columbus, and my family is from Albany and Camilla. But tell us how you came to the FDIC. Give our viewers a little bit of your story.
I'm happy to do that. It's actually a pretty interesting story. So I came to the FDIC when some corporate recruiters for the FDIC came to Savannah State University, which is a historically black university in Savannah, Georgia. And when they came, they started talking about the mission of the FDIC. They talked about keeping the banking system safe and sound, making sure that banks comply with anti-discrimination laws, and making sure that they reinvest in their communities. And so as I was sitting in my classroom listening to this, I had some memories that came to mind. I thought about my granny, my great grandmother, but I call her granny. So granny used to carry all of her money in her pocket because she grew up in the Great Depression and she would never put her money in banks. She was afraid. And then I had more hurtful memories about going to the bank with my mother, and she had applied for a loan, and I remember the way that the loan officer spoke to my mother, and as a child just sitting there
Wow.
watching the tears roll down her face, I knew one day I wanted to make a difference so that nobody ever felt like my mother. And so as the recruiters talked about the mission of the FDIC and they talked about bank examiners and the role that bank examiners play, I jumped at the opportunity to bring my voice into the room when decisions are being made that impact the banking system. So that's pretty much how I got here.
That's a great story. I think it was Maya Angelou who said, you forget what people say to you, but you never forget how they made you feel. And after all these years, you still remember, obviously, how you felt, how your mother felt sitting there. I know you led a barrier analysis at the FDIC to identify root causes to diversity challenges at the agency. Tell us more about what you learned there in your analysis and how you use that to develop the agency's strategic plan.
Right. So Diana, you did one of my favorite things, which is point to quotes. And so one of my favorite quotes is by James Baldwin. And what he
Okay.
said was that nothing, not everything can be changed, but nothing can be faced
You
until it's
changed until
changed.
it's changed. Right.
And what the barrier analysis helped us to do was to take a real look at ourselves, as an agency, as individuals, and help us see not only the things that we've heard about, but where are our blind spots. And it did it two different ways. We had the quantitative analysis and the qualitative. The quantitative was taking a look at our actual data. What does our data tell us about our makeup? And then there's the qualitative part, which is more so related to how do people feel when they go to work, because numbers only tell you part of the story. And so we
Right.
had different focus groups. And so we are still in the process of conducting that actual barrier analysis. But there are some things that we learned just from talking to employees. 2020 was a challenging year to say the least for most people.
Yeah.
And we at the FDIC, we had listening sessions. And we listened to our employees, we listened to what was happening around the world, and we identified opportunities for us to be able to make a difference. And so we started there listening. What are the things that we see that we can change right now to make sure that everyone feels like and have equal opportunity to come to work and contribute to our very important mission?
And it's interesting that you bring that up because I think for banks and financial institutions, when they think about the offices of women and minority inclusion, they're often very focused on you all's look at them as regulated entities. And they don't think about the fact, and I know I have this conversation with bankers that I interface with all the time on banking diversity policy issues. But the OMWIs are really there to, first and foremost, to do that work in the agencies, right? I think sometimes people forget that the agencies themselves are on a diversity, equity, and inclusion path, and that the agencies themselves are doing a lot of work as workplaces to advance these initiatives. And so I think it's really great that you bring that point up because oftentimes the focus is on, well, if the agency, what are they going to say about my numbers? What are they going to say about my policy? But there's very much a focus. You all know how hard this work is because you're doing it yourself.
Right. And, being two Georgia girls, you probably heard the saying, sweep around your own front door. Uh,
That's exactly what I was thinking, right?
yes.
You got
So
right. You got
we,
to, yeah.
we do that. And so the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion, we call it OMWI for short. And in our office, we really focus on three things. And the external piece is only the third part of it. First, we look
Right.
at our workforce. How can we support diversity, equity, inclusion in our workforce? And we've made progress over the years, but we've had some longstanding challenges that we're working on. The other part is actually looking at our business activities. How can we bring in minority and women-owned businesses into our contracting and procurement activities? And so making sure we basically support inclusive prosperity. And then we get to the part about supporting diversity, equity, inclusion with the financial institutions that we regulate. So it's really a broad perspective. First, looking inward,
Right.
recognizing our responsibility, we lead by example, and then
Exactly.
making sure it's throughout the organization and also supporting the industry as a whole.
So I want to touch on something you just mentioned about basically supplier diversity and procurement diversity. That's been a really big issue for the Hill, particularly for the subcommittee of the House Financial Services Committee that's led by Representative Joyce Beatty. What are you all finding on supplier diversity? I've found that our bankers are really looking for insight, right? I think there are very few places that are doing that well. And do you all have any plans to release, like, say, best practices, or just give any kind of guidance for banks who want to do better in that space and don't know where to start and maybe don't have the money to hire a consultant to tell them?
Well, Diane, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right? And so, one of the things that we're going to do, if financial institutions can actually go to the FDIC's website and look for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's actually a resource page for financial institutions. And there are a number of different resources. We talk about the joint standards for best practices for diversity, equity, inclusion. But something that we also do is we actually send out a self-assessment to financial institutions. And we take that information that financial institutions provide us and we look for best practices. Those best practices that we identify, we then place in a document and place it out on our website so any financial institution could go take a look at it. And when they do that, one of the topics that came up is actually supplier diversity. And so there is a financial institution who has found success with their supplier diversity program. And so we will share those best practices within our document that should be coming out this year. And
Wonderful.
and some of the things that we have to do, so just basic things that we've worked on at the FDIC is we look for opportunities to provide technical assistance. And then we provide opportunities to actually educate minority and women-owned businesses. doing business with the government isn't exactly like doing business with everyone else. So
Right.
providing that technical assistance, providing other educational opportunities, and also providing opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses to come into what we use in our agency. We do something called a pitch day, and at pitch
Okay.
day, they come and talk about their capabilities. We get to listen to them, and we keep a database of minority and women-owned businesses that we can use as references when we start looking to compete our contracting and services.
That was great. So, Nikita, I want to ask you next about the FDIC's strategic plan that you all just released. It's really very different from anything else that at least I've seen coming out of the agency or any of the OMWI offices on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Your plan has five goals that are five C's, which I really like: culture, career, communication, consistency, and community. Walk us through each one of these and what your plan is, and what they mean for each of those C's.
Absolutely. So, we initially drafted a plan, right? And we sent it out to our employees and asked for their feedback. And the one thing that they told us, you can do more. And we looked at it and we agreed. In addition to that, the events of 2020 happened that brought race into it as a national conversation. And more importantly, we recognize that there's an opportunity to do something broader and bigger than what we've done before. And the first C is culture, right? You probably heard culture eats strategy for lunch. And
That's
so
right.
we can build a big plan and it can lay out all these things, but if our culture isn't right, we're not going to be as effective as we can be. So some of the things we started working on is building that culture of inclusiveness. We needed to incorporate everyone. We included it as a as performance standard for our managers to
Huge.
cultivate, diversity, cultivate a culture of inclusion, a culture of excellence. Really making it something that our managers are responsible for. We also made sure that we went into looking at how can other employees be involved in it. Making sure that we are all equipped to be successful and having a good culture at the agency. And the main thing that we did is we actually defined in this plan what is our vision as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion. How do we plan to achieve that vision, and what are our values? And so in this plan, we literally lay out the different values, how we expect to treat one another and operate within the agency. The next C goes into career. You get your culture together and then you look at the career. And we want to make sure from the time we start recruiting, when we hire, and as an employee goes through their entire life cycle, employment cycle rather, that there is equal opportunity for absolutely every employee. We were intentional about our recruiting efforts. That means that in addition to all the other areas where we might recruit, that we're intentional about going to minority serving institutions and women serving institutions to do recruiting. And then when we went through our hiring process, looking at making sure that we implement best practices like having diverse interview panels to bring in all the perspectives of when we're considering applicants for hire. Once we get employees on, do we provide the support and career development opportunities? We've done a number of different things. One of the more recent things we do, FDIC, we have a good career development tool called Expressions of Interest. And this is where an employee has the opportunity to express an interest in doing different type of work, and it helps them to grow. Previously, that required a supervisor to agree to it, say yes or no, and then there tends to be selecting people that you're most familiar with. And so
Right.
what we've recently done is it took that away. Employees are empowered to select the opportunities that are best for them. And then in addition to that, we provide ask managers to not select someone who's recently had a developmental opportunity, but broaden that pool and give more people opportunity.
Changes.
The third C, I believe, is communication.
Yep.
So we can dream all of this at a management level, But if we're not telling people about the plan, what we
Right.
expect, where we are, and constantly talking about it
Right.
as we're doing it, making sure that we communicate with one vision, one message about how we expect to see diversity, equity, inclusion when FDIC. And the same thing we did actually with our plan itself. We could have kept it at the FDIC,
That's right.
but what we did was held ourselves accountable. We communicated it out to the public so everyone can see, it's not a secret, what we plan to do, how we plan to do it, and we will put out our different impact reports to help us stay accountable for the progress. The next C, consistency,
Huge.
huge. So
Huge.
you like quotes like I do, Diana, right? Okay, so let me give you this quote. You know, um, what the quote says is that all the excitement that makes for a good story, right?
Right.
Consistency actually makes for
Results.
progress and
Right.
results, right?
Results.
And so that's what we focused on here. How can we get past this being the story of the day, and how can we really make lasting change? And so we're putting different steps in place to, for example, having our data, and that we look at our data regularly, that we measure the progress. We actually revamped our entire data system that we're working on right now to be able to provide actionable data. So it's not just numbers on a page, but it's information that a manager can use and employees can use to help us with our decision making. And so just making sure that we're continuously building on our processes. So it's not just a legal compliance, but it's how can we create the best situation for all employees to have equal opportunity. And then the last part is community. And this is of particular importance to us because all our other plans really focus on our internal workforce.
Right.
And there was an opportunity for us to do more in this space that's already within our mandate. And we have opportunities to really impact the community in a different kind of way and more effectively. And so that's what our community talking about, our work with minority and women-owned businesses, minority and women-owned investors, minority and
Great.
women-owned law firms, and then looking at our financial institutions. How can we partner with our financial institutions, help to make the process of providing financial information easier? How can we provide them information that's useful? Just being a partner in this process. And so what we really wanted to do is provide a holistic view of diversity, equity, inclusion to provide us with a foundation. And we hope and expect that to succeed at this and continue to grow with this process.
That's awesome. And so I know we're getting close to time. I'm glad you brought up the role of the financial institutions that you regulate. To close out, what would you tell banks and financial institutions about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how they should be thinking about this monumentally important issue?
The one thing I would say is one size doesn't fit all, right? FDIC, we primarily regulate community banks.
Right.
Just like people, every community has its own personality, and there isn't a one size fit all, but you can also take a look at the data that you have in front of you to help you make decisions, and also listen to your people, listen to your community. What are the unique needs of your community? That's the beautiful thing about diversity. It's
Right.
broad, and it embraces and capitalizes on the strength of us as individuals, whether it's a human individual or
Right.
individual communities. So I encourage banks to look for opportunities, not to make it a one size fit all, but identify what will work best for the needs that they have, and realize that you're just not in it alone, and that the FDIC is a resource along with many other groups that can support this process.
Wonderful. Well, Nikita, thank you so much for being here with us today. It has been a pleasure. I know we'll continue to work together, and thanks everyone for attending this Comply session.